to rehash later. So, but does that make sense, Lisa? So both types of imagination, one removes you from the present moment, and of course there's the dumpster.
Yes, I get it.
And then the other one kind of overlaps it. Like if I imagine your face with, I don't know, I guess that would be weird. I'm not going to use that example. So if I imagine a person with wings, I'm just imagining wings on their body. That is kind of superimposed over the present moment. Both can be unconscious and both can be on purpose. For my practice, it's in principle for it to be on purpose. However, one is limited and one is not. So you should be able to start to see the principles, and I'm not just making this shit up. Jerry, why would one of these be limited and the other one not? In the way that I've been talking about things for the last 4 years. Or Ida, if you'd like to answer, why would, or Jerry, since you, so superimposing imagination over the present moment versus an imagination that takes you away from the present moment. One is limited.
One is deliberate and one isn't.
They can both be deliberate. You can intend both at the beginning of the day. You could say at 3 o'clock, I'm going to imagine myself on Mars. And if at 3 o'clock you imagine yourself on Mars, that is a deliberate technique. It falls in all the principles. It's intended, it's on purpose, it's using your imagination, it's how you see fit. So, no.
I would say it keeps you in the present moment.
That's
Keeps
the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense, Jerry? One technique is removing you from the present moment. And so that one is going to be fundamentally.
I wasn't hearing the whole thing.
Okay.
I didn't hear the whole thing. Pardon me, my allergy eyes were distracting me.
That's all good. So if I'm using my imagination and it removes me from the moment, that is a limited technique, right? Does that make sense? Does it make sense why it's limited? That could become grossly imbalanced. And I'm not engaging the moment. That's the primary thesis, is that the human being is not present, not engaging the present moment. That's the cause of all the psychosis. And
say you're doing a dreamy meditation type thing, and you've got headphones on, and you're aware of your body, but you can use your imagination to take you away.
I'll just explain it, Ida, and then we'll go from there. But
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm kind of meandering to my point. So, okay, so now we understand, at least in the way that I'm talking about things. We have two types of imagination. Both can be deliberate. So both can be a valid technique. However, one is more limited than the other because one removes you from the present moment while one is interacting with the present moment. So which one do you think I favor, Ida, between those two? I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're subject to the principle of balance and not the balance of the technique, but the balance of engaging the present moment. So if you do a technique that removes you from it, you're only contributing to that imbalance even more. So which do you think that I favor, Ida?
Well, you favor the present moment, but it's okay to go off into something else occasionally.
If it's deliberate and on purpose and I choose, yeah. That's why I do it in the morning. And I'm not saying everybody has to do that, but hold on one second. We'll let this guy back up. Me too, Ina. I like it. I find a way to just, I don't know, I find something about everything. That's the flower opening. What's that, Jay?
Did you just shut your window so it was open?
A little, I shut it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have air conditioning, so.
Yeah, no, oh, really? Oh, at all?
Mm-mm. We might get a little air conditioner for Neo, a window air conditioner that connects to the window, but we're in Chicago, it's windy, and you don't get very many like super hot days here. Most of the days are 80 in the summer, 80, 85, with, they call it the Windy City. So it does get breezy.
I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea.
If you keep the wind blowing, It's nice. If you close all the windows and it gets stagnant, then it just heats up like any other place. But
Huh.
because we're elevated and there's no real tall buildings around us, we can open any of our windows and we just get super airflow, no matter which direction the wind's coming from. Pretty cool.
Have you I heard this on a quiz at the weekend, that another name for Chicago is the Big Onion?
No, I've never heard that.
I was on a quiz show at the weekend, and it said a city in Illinois, also known as the Big Onion.
Why do they call it that? It doesn't smell like
I
an
don't
onion.
know. I don't know. You might see some restaurants called the Big Onion on your way around.
I don't know. Uh-huh. So Ida was asking about my practice. So now that you know the difference between the two, the technique is deliberate, it's on purpose. Superimposing imagination is something that I do almost all of the time, Ida. So remember that I am maintaining multiple techniques, and the first technique, I would say the most basic, is body awareness. And if we wanted to break that down so that we're not getting weird, I mean, we can get weird, that's cool, but it's nice to be able to talk in many different ways. We're talking about the peripheral nervous system, our ability to sense our own body. Some people wouldn't consider that sensory perception because it's not how they would consider it outside. We're not perceiving, it's already in us, but of course, I don't really look at it quite that way. But does that make sense? So that's my most basic, maintained point of attention. Hi, Lauren. Good morning. Thanks for hanging out. So Ida asked me. Yes.
Yeah.
What's that, Ida? What were you going to say?
You said, what's your most maintained point of attention? I think with you, it's the Dantian, isn't it?
Oh, no. It's body awareness. It's whole body. I don't.
All of it.
All of it. I don't as much focus on individual areas as much. It just depends on the activity. If I'm walking, then my Dantian is kind of leading me. If I'm standing, then my golden line is definitely where it needs to be. But I don't stay there. So places that I stay, smooth breath, whole body awareness, and an imagination technique that's interacting with my environment. Hydrostacy is when you sense into the room. So can wherever you're sitting, do you feel like you can extend your senses into the room? Do you feel like you can kind of expand your perception ability in the room around you? Do you feel like you can do that right now? Especially if your mind is a little bit quieter and you're not thinking, you can kind of just sense. Tai Chi listening behind you. Does that make sense though? Kind of expanding into the room. That's a technique that I maintain. This is on my card in Hydrostacy, the little note card. Imagination technique. I maintain an imagination technique. And when I'm expressing personal power, just do energy, I have a particular imagination technique, and it is just a matter of my attention. I just place my attention, and it kind of just, it happens, it occurs. And it is right about in the third eye area. It's really, let's see if I can draw it. So it starts with the golden line. Well, I'll draw the human guy. I guess it could be a gal. It doesn't have to be a guy. Excuse me. A human person. And it doesn't have to be a guy or a gal. You can identify how it wants to. But it's just a person. Okay. And then golden line. These are the small areas of perception that I created and that I would pay attention to. So you have the crown. My circles aren't matching up. If I'm ever talking, then you know it's my throat. But I do maintain, I do also maintain, and this is just because Ida asked. Ida asked me about what I mean by directing personal power with attention and imagination, and so I'm just answering that question in a very thorough way. And then here's Dantian down here, Ida. These are the points we haven't talked as much about, but I'm happy to. But the palm of the hands and the soles of the feet are great points. And I don't want to put too many points on here because I'm not trying to do anything. But something does occur because this is reasonably whole body, right? Can you see that, Ida? These points of attention, if alternating between them, is kind of covering my whole body, my hands and, you know, the center and the dantian and the top. And that creates this feeling. Let's see, I gotta kind of move this guy around. It creates the feeling of adaptability. I feel secure in my own space. Like I don't feel wobbly. Physically, emotionally, you know, everything. And it creates what I call, and I'm doing this as a technique, but expanding into the room and then expanding beyond the room creates the bubble of perception. It's already there. You're already engaging a bubble of perception. For 2,000 points, if you're thinking to yourself, where is your bubble of perception? The bubble of perception is what, you know, it's active. But where is your bubble of perception if you're thinking to yourself?
Inside your head, just?
Yeah, it's in this, I don't know exactly where. I'm going to learn more about that in next semester's brain, neuro, whatever. But yeah, your bubble of perception is just right here. That's why you can get, someone can sneak up on you, you miss things, you're not really paying attention to anything around you, because the bubble of your perception is just this tiny little fucking thing inside of your brain. So I am expanding my bubble of perception using my sensory perception, sensory attention training. I'm using my senses to expand, listening behind me, defocused vision, breaking the horizon, body awareness. And from practicing these points every day, Ida, it has created a type of whole body awareness. And the effect from maintaining whole body awareness, I don't, this is a disclaimer, just to be fair, I don't maintain the smooth breath all the time. I can, but I don't typically do that. There's a lot going on that's new, and it kind of, so I don't always have attention on it. And if I want to, I will, but yeah, no force. So I don't always have attention on a smooth breath, but it's a high percentage. And it creates a feeling that is, I don't know, it's hydrostacy, but boom, the expanding energy.
Sort of makes you feel, I think, from what you're saying, that you're really here.
Yes.
You're really alive. You're
Yes.
really where you're in your head. It's just you're just a wee tiny thought in your head. But
Yes.
when you do what you're saying, when you're aware of your body, there's a feeling of, I don't know, just being alive, living
Yes. Yes.
real life.
Mm-hmm. And that's all this picture is attempting to do, is describe feeling. I've had to resort to drawing this little stick figure because this is these little center points of energy in the chest and in my hands. I feel those. I put attention in those areas and they like light up. They're energized, and then I feel that adaptability effect. And now I have my hydrostacy bubble. I want to point out, if you don't mind, this is the internal points of attention is P1. So you start doing this from day one. This is the same thing. The bubble of perception that I'm creating. Remember, in the beginning of this practice, I would classify that as outside of my body. That's an active P2. And then what do I add? As often as I can remember, and I feel that I need to, smooth breath. And then what do I do? P2 plus. Now this is answering your question, Eva. I know I got there in a roundabout way, but this is P2 plus what? What's P2 plus in warrior training? Eyes on what you're doing. Focus on what you're doing. You're looking at what you're doing. You're engaging the activity in front of you. And that equals just do energy. That is intention and will. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And then there's another feeling that occurs. And you can imagine it. I can actually, I don't know, I don't want to get woo-woo, but I can see it. And it's right here in the third eye. And wherever I point that, imagine it like watercolor. Everything just flows that direction. That's the nature of attention. Wherever you shine it, everything goes that direction. It's a very simple principle. It's present in a lot of different belief systems, and you can find it almost everywhere. Wherever you direct your attention, everything goes that way. It moves that way. We are creators in that fashion because we can direct attention. But so can everything else. But we have an element, spark of consciousness, awareness of self. So, Ida, does that make sense? So now, this is a result of the practice. I have an active P1, body awareness. Smooth breath as often as I can remember, very high percentage, but not every day. I don't maintain the smooth breath all day, every day. But I do maintain at least body awareness. I don't go out of my body. And so I have the P1, P2, which is the bubble of perception. There's a lot going on in my bubble of perception, and I've been talking for years about that and how I do it. But I'm doing it. That's the thing. I hope nobody here looks at this as some sort of abstract happening, like it's just a done thing that's just occurring on its own. No. No. I have to do this. Where is my mind? Am I aware of my feet on the ground? Am I aware of the room? Am I expanding into the room that I'm in? And that's the P2. And then I just focus on what I'm doing. That creates just do energy. This area of my body feels something. And I'm going to say it feels like creative energy. It feels like just do. It feels like personal power expressing. These are just words to describe a feeling, and I did a demonstration. And I'm not bragging, and I can answer any question, but this move to Chicago, the job, the things that we're doing, some of these external things, some of the internal things, I wanted to show it. I wanted to go back into the cannabis industry to express what I've learned. That's an earnest thing. That's my garden. That has nothing to do with anybody else. I've learned some things from Beyond Hello, and I would like to use my practice to express that understanding unto wisdom, to show that it can be done to me and to others, inspirational type of thing. So I decided to do something, engaged my practice, done, all of it. And as long as I have this, when things don't meet my expectation, because I live in a world where I don't control other people, I don't even control myself. So I'm not trying to control other people. But this is the adaptability factor. I'm free to move. I'm not sitting here thinking about not thinking and thinking about what they're thinking and thinking about what I should be thinking and thinking about who's thinking what everybody else is thinking. And no, I'm not fucking doing that. So I'm present. I'm mindful. I'm adaptable. I can fully experience, enjoy my life. And like Ida said, suddenly everything just starts to open up to you. You know, you look at things in a different way, you see things in a different way, and sometimes it can be tricky to explain it. Sometimes you don't even feel the need to. And then sometimes you just create art to explain how you feel. I think that the way that I teach can be an art because I'm only expressing how I feel, even if I teach psychology. Okay, does that make sense, Ida? Does that answer your question?
Yes, especially the bit about the all of it is great. I'll
And
stop.
to satisfy the skeptic, we can say that all of the shining of the light behind my head and the feeling of this bubble and we could just say it's all imagination, and I don't care. Because I'm not trying to see. Remember when you read Don Juan and Carlos Castaneda, Carlos had this incessant tendency to want to know, would this be valid to another person? So did I turn into a bird? Well, is that, would Jerry see me as a bird? And Don Juan just, of course, would redirect him. It doesn't matter. No, they probably won't, because they're not in that vibrational frequency to see the bird. They'll just see a person. Do you see what I mean? So, yeah. All right. Any more questions? This is open study. Ida asked a little bit about, those techniques, and Ida, I do sometimes, actually quite often, superimpose imagination. I'm doing it almost all the time. Some of it is feeling, some of it is something that I'm doing for fun, but the imagination technique is very important for me in hydrostacy. And as long as it's a part of the present moment, it's engaging the present moment, like my dragon flying above me, then I'm good with it. And as long as it's not, I don't know a good way to put this. I want to say negative, negative. I wouldn't imagine somebody like in pain because they're, making me wait or something. You know how people can get vindictive and they can start to think terrible thoughts like, oh, that's not what I mean. So I guess if I was being specific, the imagination is really just benign. It's not really for anything. I'm just doing it because it's a valid technique and it fits all of the criteria for my principles. I'm present. I'm choosing to do it on purpose. It helps me to not label, judge, and evaluate the present moment in words because I don't want to do that. And it helps me feel better. So that's the 3 pillars. CNN. An oil firm thinks it has struck big. Thanks for that update. All right, any other questions? How's your practice been? Are you still doing your practice? We had a pretty big gap. Did you notice any, I don't know, what did you notice? Are you noticing?
Yeah, I noticed that I enjoy missing the classes slightly, but enjoying the space of not being stressed out about doing my practice. Sometimes when we're doing all the classes throughout the week, I get myself into a sort of not doing enough feeling. Where this gap, where it's just once a week, I can relax into it, but without coasting, as Donna says, still keeping my practice to the forefront when I can.
Mm-hmm. And then you can notice that, and I'm sure you have already, but when you are beating yourself up, or when you are trying to evaluate yourself, that's all occurring as thought, all of it. And that is a battleground, and that needs to be rule of 3. So anytime that I would find myself thinking about, am I doing enough? Because I did that, Ida. No, rule of 3. I'm not going to think that. I'm doing what I'm doing. If that's not enough, fuck it. But I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, see what happens. But I'm not going to keep thinking those thoughts. I have my battlegrounds, So, battleground, one thing that I've also noticed, I'm going to save this one because I think that's a pretty good whiteboard. So we have the residual. One way that I talk about residual is memory. And there's so many ways that we can talk about memory. But the residual effect of trauma, the residual effect of years of doing a habit, those things do linger in the body. We know that. That's not an excuse. My mind is still my responsibility. Where my mind goes is still my responsibility. I'm still going to hold myself accountable. But we do accumulate certain habits when we're resisting the present moment, either actively or passively. Does that make sense? And I call it a pull. Feels like a little bit like gravity towards habit. The times that we're the most unconscious is the times that we're most habitual.
Yes, and I've been practicing a thing where I'm not looking at the clock in the mornings. I've been feeling a bit pulled towards every direction and lots of things to do, and that feeling of not having enough time to myself to do the things that I want to do. But not looking at the clock and finding I can do the things, and I do seem to get them done. Whether it's the clock that's putting the battleground feeling into it, being um, kind of restricted to a certain time, but I'm not restricted at all, really. I mean, it's all in my own head. But by not looking at the clock and being less aware of time, it's helping the morning flow more without that constant drag of getting things done for a certain time.
Yeah. So clock watching. I personally noticed in my experience at the restaurant was when I was working with clock watching. Have you ever heard that term at work where people are clock watching? You would do it in school
Yes, and
probably.
I don't need to do that. I'm at home, but I still do it.
Right. But what I noticed is that I had a habit of doing that. And that habit had accumulated momentum. And to not look at the clock felt like the energy of denial. So I just found a new way to interact with the clock. Defocused vision and mantras while looking at the clock. Things like that. Just a suggestion, one would be more reflective of the principles of this practice. Ida, if not looking at the clock is working for you, then I'm not here to float your boat. You see what I mean? But in terms of non-resistance and not trying to control and not using the force of denial, unless you feel you need to. That's your choice, though. But do you see what I mean, though?
Yes, I do see what you mean, but I find that I know what time it is anyway.
Mm.
Without looking at the clock, you know, when you've lived as long as I have, you kind of get to know a feeling for a certain time of the day.
I like that. And if I felt the urge to look at the clock, I would probably just go ahead and kind of look at it, look towards it, and say that mantra.
Yeah.
And I'm just telling you what I would do, just to give you ideas. I like Lisa's idea too, setting reminders so that she could relax about time. And then it would just be, okay, 3, move on. That works too. I liked mantras, redirecting, defocused vision, so I can still look at the clock, you know. And then eventually, if you're doing this practice and you have the cognitive attention and you're aware of how you feel and how you're thinking, eventually looking at the clock just won't feel good. And then now we're actually getting into one of the most advanced concepts in this practice, and that's behavioral change. How does behavioral change occur? Well, I'm going to give you an example of that over this next year. That's called expressing knowledge unto wisdom. What you have learned, you have an opportunity to express it. It will come again. I'm not a big fan of forcing that, like, forcing myself into a situation to test myself. Somebody's going to be rude to me. That will be, when I get the test. I don't need to go run into traffic just to test myself. I will be tested in terms of there's people around me that I need to adapt to. So it is what it is. But that's another good one. Yes, Shannon.
I was just saying also kind of what Ida was kind of reminding herself in a productive manner that looking at the clock, I mean, it doesn't help the time go any slower. So why you're still going to have the same list of things to do. So why worry about what time it is? It's kind of reminding yourself that you don't need to add that additional worry to what you're doing. Because that kind of slows you down sometimes.
It does. Yeah. No, so that's perfect. And so here's the difference, though, between this practice and most other practices. What you just said in most other practices would be chalked up as a realization. Now you just need to somehow remember that realization. I would turn what Shana just said in relation to Ida looking at the clock into a mantra. And when I feel the pull to look at the clock, I will tell myself what Shana just said And now it becomes a technique that I'm using in the present moment to redirect my mind and not just an abstract. And that's the voice of power. The voice of power can tell you that. Do you see what I mean? So here I am, I'm walking along and I'm about to look at my clock again and I'm like, because of my practice, maybe I was paying attention to my Dantian, I see it. I'm like, oh, I'm looking at my clock again, or I'm saying a word, a part of my sentence that I don't want, and then I see it. As soon as I say it, I'm like, whoa, please omit that. Remember, Shana, omit that from, my sentence, because I would ideally like to see it before I say it, but at least I saw it right after, and now I can redirect it and change it. But this practice is active, so use the realization as a mantra, as your voice of power. I call that telling yourself true things.
Yeah, and then also, like, when I look at the clock as well, it just creates anxiety, like, about what I'm doing, because I'm worried about getting something done. So that's a reminder to myself that you're just going to create more anxiety, and you're going to rush things, and things won't have as much quality if you were just doing them rather than worrying about getting them done in a particular time.
And I love that. And I think that's true. Now, if you're activating the voice of power in this practice and using productive self-dialogue, maybe you even need to write that down, so you can remember it when the time comes. But it's about remembering that, saying that to yourself, not just some abstract realization that you're going to file and forget. That's what I did that for 30 years and didn't amount to shit. So do you see how I'm kind of highlighting this is a practice? So if we're going to take what Shana just said in relation to what Ida's talking about with the time, we have to somehow merge that with our present moment and on purpose. The mantra is how to do that. The voice of power is how to do that.
It did sound like what Ida was doing. It was like when she was doing.
Yeah.
She had that real, while she was doing it, the voice of power came in and reminded. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and the voice of power, the way that I'm talking about it, will tell you what's what. It'll tell you what's what about the present moment. That's what intuition does. That's what intelligence is. It's present. It's always present. That's what intelligence is, omnipresent. So, Ida, sometimes the voice of power will tell you something that is true to you about the present moment, such as you don't need to look at the clock.
Yeah, I do get that quite often now.
You could look at that
I'm
as
the only one
that's
I'm doing this to me, I'm doing it to myself. I mean, there's nobody with a whip behind me sort of saying, stay on time.
Yes.
Except me.
And maybe you have an Abraham Hicks type of voice of power and it doesn't use certain words. Maybe you have an Ernest type of voice of power and it's going to tell you, you don't have to fucking look at the clock. Like, you've been doing that shit your whole life, man. Has that made anything ever go faster? No, it makes it go slower, and you know that. That's my voice of power. It's a bit cheeky. But do you see what I mean? That's how I take these realizations, these ahas. How does it become a part of something present? You have to say it to yourself. You have to remind yourself. The voice of power is a perfect way to do that. And that's why the next book is so good. It can save your life. Like, it can save someone's life. The voice of power can be one of the most important, essential aspects and it's not reprogramming and all of that. It's reminding yourself to be it's reminding yourself of presence, mindfulness, and to engage the present moment. And that's why it works. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's all very good reminders, and this is why meeting all of you guys every week is so important for me. The class really helps.
Yeah, and I've already committed, and I'll talk about that, the word commitment, but I've already committed, as long as you guys are wanting to come to this, I'll make sure it's at least once a week. And I do have ideas and a lot of creative energy, as you can imagine, but I don't make myself too available, so I'll let you know. But I do have a lot of ideas. It's really flowing. Yes, Jerry.
I'm gonna put my hand down. I agree, Ida, very much. I just wanted to clarify something. It was, you guys are in a topic, so I didn't want to interrupt, but just before we go, or however long we're going to be here. You'd said something a few minutes ago. Just wanted to clarify what I heard, because I don't think I heard you right. You were talking about those things that you learned at Beyond Hello, and you wanted to take your practice to Sunnyside, and or something like that. You were just kind of, just kind of chit-chatting, and you just kind of said, kind of offhanded, you said, I'm not looking to control anybody. I don't even control myself. But I think I misunderstood you. I think what you said was, I only control myself. Is that what you said? I didn't hear you.
No, you heard me. I don't control myself, Jerry. There's no control. I'm not controlling myself.
Well, no, but I mean, if our life is deliberate,
it's not control.
I think the only thing we have responsibility and control over is ourself and our choices. So yeah, I'm glad I brought it up.
I don't use the word control. There's nothing about control for me. I do one thing. I direct my attention on purpose. I am my attention, Jerry. There is no control. Control implies subject over an object, does it not? Control implies a subject having control over an object. Isn't that the definition of the word control?
Yes. So the word, I think,
there is no
yeah.
subject and object when it comes to attention itself. To direct attention is not an act of control, and that's all I'm doing, ever. I'm not declaring war on behavior. I'm not really changing behavior. It changes on its own because of the feeling, because of the cognitive attention on the present moment, cognitive attention training. I can see what doesn't feel good. Eventually lying didn't feel good. Eventually, eating 3 bowls of ice cream didn't feel good. Shana and I have, sweeted it up this week because we're in a new move. Isn't it, Shana? It's starting to not feel good, right? We can feel that. We're present. We're not just in the habit. I do not control myself. I do not control habits. I do not control behaviors. Here's an example, Jerry, if you don't mind. Can I give you an example? I do not use control.
Yes.
I am not controlling anything. Control
Yeah, I agree.
is a word that we've created. It is the number one habit of the human mind, is to attempt to control the future, attempt to control outcomes, attempt to control ourselves, attempt to control other people, and it's a trap. It's not real. We've made it up. So, this one, oh no, that doesn't work good. Never mind. The way that it looks on here, it looks like a screen, and that would have been perfect for the spider's web. So, I'm not going to draw this very good, but maybe I'll try here. Just so you know, I am, wait, okay. I don't know how to draw a spider's web. Can you guys just use your imagination? Imagine this as a delicately woven spider web. Okay, maybe not. This is my spider's web. And as you can see, it's not always so elegant. I'm using this as an analogy for my life experience. Does that make sense, Jerry, since this is your question? We're talking about the incessant tendency to control, the mind's biggest habit, and that's what warrior training is all about. We're not trying to control. Instead, we're doing something else. We're engaging the light of attention and awareness, conscious, and everything else. And that's not control. There's no subject, there's no object. I am attention. How do we know? I've never had a moment in my life experience without attention. I have had moments without thinking. I've had moments without certain types of emotion. I have never had a moment removed from my human body. Not in my experience, at least.
Can I just add something
Sure.
to that question?
Mm-hmm.
I had a feeling, I knew when you were making that statement, because the word control was in that sentences, that I was misunderstood. I know control is off your plate. It's not something you're going to entertain. So if we were to take that word out of this, maybe what I'm relating to is our class in general, not tending another's garden, not, some of these things that just, it is my responsibility to make my deliberate choices. Maybe that would be a better way of saying it and take the control. I think I understand what you're saying, but I was just going to bring it back to my responsibility and accountability for my choices. I guess that's what I was.
Well, it's not responsibility.
Leading up to.
No, and here's the small little thing that's different. It's not responsibility and accountability for choices. It's responsibility and accountability for one thing and one thing only ever. What is that?
My attention.
The third pillar. That's it. That's my only responsibility, because that is the source of peace. From peace comes everything else. And that's what I'm demonstrating. I don't need to control, because I can simply do my practice, have just do energy, and everything is expressed. It's not trying to control. It's not trying to manipulate. It's not trying to predetermine. Shane and I don't know, was the move to Chicago right versus wrong? Is this job right versus wrong? We're not evaluating it that way, because it's just do energy. It's conscious creation. It's expression. It's just do. We'll learn. So, the way that I was relating that to the spider's web is, well, how does behavioral change occur then, if we're not attempting to control, if we're not trying to manipulate, if we're not using the energy of denial? How do these things occur over time? And it is because of the cognitive attention training. If I can see the web that I'm creating, then I can just go back to the practice. So I'm not even going to try to create a more elegant web, Jerry. I don't need to. If I have peace, what will happen? Because peace is a mind that is not resisting the present moment. If my mind is not resisting the present moment, what will happen? My desires will
flow.
It will flow. My desires will be expressed. I'll do what I want to do. I don't have to think it. I don't have to mud up the process. I can just focus, and that energy thing that I was talking about earlier happens. And it's a lot of fucking just do energy. And you got to still be adaptable, because if it involves other people, then we have to adapt to their free will as well. Free will, not free thinking about things and free force and free manipulation and free control. Free will. And that has nothing to do with words. That has nothing to do with trying to control. It has to do with the direction of attention. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I just wanted to get a clarification. As I was listening, I had a thought, and then I kind of dropped it. I agree with everything you're saying. I understand what you're saying. Oh, I lost my words. I guess what I was going to say is, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with the idea that I don't have control. Seems to be the word to describe that I don't have control over me. Because why would I not? It's me. It's my choices, my thinking.
Is it your choices? So what did you choose to eat today, Jerry?
I haven't.
Okay. What did you choose to eat yesterday, Jerry?
What did you say?
What did you choose to eat yesterday?
We made homemade ground beef. We tried it for the first time.
That was your choice, right?
Yeah, it was kind of fun. Yeah, right. I made those choices. I'm responsible for the shit I do.
Are you sure?
What? Well, if I didn't, who else did?
The electrical signals being sent from your gut to your brain. And the reason that it's sending those electrical signals from your gut to your brain, telling you what you want to eat, is a derivative of your entire life experience and what you've been eating up to this point. So the bacteria in your gut is communicating via your central nervous system up through your spine to say either starches or sugars or things like that taste good. If you were born in a completely different country, let's say India, for example, you would not be having burger. The thought of burger would just be absolutely atrocious to you. So sometimes the things that we look at as choice is really not quite what we're talking about. And that's why I could be in a computer generated matrix where the liking of coffee has been programmed but I can still know one thing for sure. Even if I'm in a computer generated matrix, you don't know that your choice of food was your own choice and not just the totality of your experience so far expressing itself, which is what is actually occurring. And we just use words that are actually not that appropriate for what's occurring. So we're not really choosing necessarily, not the way that I use the word.
But
That's
we are
not free will.
creating. But to tie this in, I re-listened to class from 426 over the weekend. It was beautiful. Just happened to come across it. And I lost some of my notes. They were kind of messy. But you were saying in there, I can't paraphrase because I'm not remembering, something to the effect that if you are experiencing it, if you are feeling it, something in there, and I wrote it down, you are creating it.
You are creating it.
You said that
Yes.
very clearly.
That's true.
You are creating it. So I do believe that, but I'm tying this in with something else. I'm
Word.
getting something mixed up here.
It's coming from
Aren't
words.
Yeah.
So there is only one thing that I am absolutely sure I can choose. What is that? I'm sure it's mine. I can choose it. My food, I don't know. That has a lot to do with American diet, the region that I live in, the totality of my experience, my taste buds. Could have a little bit to do with DNA too, because I've noticed that, well, but that's all biology and things like that. That's why a lot of biologists will talk to them about choice, and they'll have a very interesting conversation depending on the level of their degree in biology. They'll actually start to break down the biological processes that are occurring that you think are choice, that you think is the vortex, and they could actually tell you which hormones are occurring, are being transmitted for you to feel that. So they'll look at things in a very different way. So but this practice is void of that. It can avoid all of that because there's one thing that I choose. One thing. What do I choose?
The direction of our mind.
The direction of my, you cannot take that away from me. No biologist on earth can tell me if my attention is deliberate. And now, if my attention is not deliberate, well, now you can manipulate it. You can pull it. You can, all of a sudden I'm looking at boobs and I don't know why.
I think there's also a difference between the deliberate choice and control. Like when I think of control, like when I think I'm in control of something, there's an attachment to me. Like there's attachment to an outcome for me. But when I have a deliberate choice, I make a choice and then I go and I flow with it. But if I'm trying to control something, I'm trying to control it to go my direction. Like there's a particular outcome that I have in mind when I'm controlling something. So that's how I, in my mind, distinguish between the two. I do have some control issues, so I can feel that. Like I have when I experience myself trying to control something, that's what I feel. I feel like I have an idea of how I want it to turn out. Like I have an outcome in mind when I'm attempting to control. When I'm doing a deliberate choice, I'm just flowing with it. I make a choice and I, see where it takes me from there. There's no like outcome in mind. I just go with the flow.
And
or there's no attachment to the outcome. Like it has to work out this way,
I think that's a really important point. The attachment to an outcome, the outcome is a thought. We thought about that outcome. We imagined it or something that's cognitive that's occurring, that outcome. However, with this practice, the deliberate attention, the third pillar, it only needs to be because your mind isn't used to doing it. There's no outcome. I don't tell you to look at the clock for this effect. I don't tell you to put your mind here for this particular effect. Other practices do that. Have you noticed this practice doesn't do that at all? I'll make some suggestions, you go do them or not. I don't care. Like you don't have to do my practice because that's not the principle.
Also with deliberate choice, when you have deliberate choice, there's thousands of potential pathways but when you're trying to control, you're kind of controlling it into a particular direction. It's like it can only go this way. That's how I feel like with the word control. That's how I feel with it. But when I'm deliberate choosing, it's like, oh, I have this and I can do this direction or this direction. There's so many possibilities. But when I'm controlling it, it just seems like I only have, laser vision into one direction.
Mm-hmm. And here's a way that you can look at this. If the way that you're looking at something requires words, there may be an error there. So you notice the outcomes, the thinking about the outcomes, all of that, it's all requiring words. Attempting to control typically requires words, and then it gets into the body. Now it's a hot mess of psychological suffering, but yeah. So not leaving the towel on the bed, Jerry, I don't have to try to control to change that behavior. I just need to pay attention. And then I can feel it. And I remember that this isn't something I want to do. Does that make sense? Paying attention to the feeling. I don't need the words. And so then it's not control. It's not trying to manipulate. I'm not using force. It's just a matter of the direction of my attention.
It's a seer's path.
It is the seer's path.
Yeah.
Exactly. The seer's path is feeling. You feel it. You can feel what is not in alignment. Does that make sense? If you try to do that when you're in psychological suffering, you're only going to feel the derivative of all your thought. That's not what I'm talking about. That's why some of these things are tricky to talk about in the beginning, because there's two things that are required for knowledge. It's experience and information. I can give you some of my experience, but your own will be better. And then you will have the knowledge. And then you can express that knowledge unto wisdom. Until then, it's very difficult to, if not impossible. Great class or study.
I guess one feeling of control is if you feel resistance when you're making your choices. Like you feel like a lot of resistance, like in your choices, because that's in your mind. You're thinking about it. It's like you're either going to make the choice or not. You don't have to really conceptualize it too much, because if you're feeling resistance, you're focused on what outcomes are possibly ahead. But that doesn't mean that you don't have to, see what outcomes are ahead, but that you don't have to put all of your focus there.
Yeah, like the fox will walk up to the lake and it will consider the fact that it could be thin. It considers that. It doesn't dwell on it. It doesn't create psychological suffering. It doesn't. And then it just proceeds cautiously, deliberately, and gently because it knows it's using previous experience unto wisdom.
Yeah, that's a good example.
And then the only other thing, of course, and this is Ernest being Ernest, but resistance isn't necessarily a negative feeling. So if you're thinking, you're in an act of resistance. You are resisting the present moment in favor of thought. That is my fundamental thesis. That's the reason we're all here today, is because we all got into the habit of ignoring the present moment to favor thought. That is resistance. We are resisting the present moment either unconsciously or on purpose in favor of thinking all of the time. And that creates a type of psychosis. And then all of psychology, it's a psychosis inside of a psychosis. But they're not ready to admit that thinking itself is in an absolute imbalance in our culture, in human culture, not just individual culture. It's not the Irish versus the English. No. Almost all major civilizations are in a complete imbalance of thinking and identifying with that thought and attempting to control. That makes sense? What is that?
And nobody else ever mentions it.
I'm going to push the spider out the window.
Oh no.
I'm going to push it.
Poor wee spider.
I'm pushing it.
All right.
And it's like jumping around, so I know it.
I was going to ask, you wouldn't get as many big spiders probably in the city.
I'll let you know.
Okay.
I don't have that experience.
Yeah.
Anything would just be speculation. I don't even have that information.
I see them on the, when we walk under the tunnels, so they're there. I don't know how big they are. I see the web, so they're eating good.
But you would think with the cold weather that, you know, they wouldn't make it as long, right?
There's spiders there.
There's
It's the
got- I mean,
Midwest.
there
You
is,
got, you got spiders.
Yeah. I don't mind. They're just trying to live, trying to eke out a living. All right, so I think that was a pretty good discussion.
Okay.
Any other comments? So
I was just
Yeah.
going to ask you, is it colder where you're living now to where you were living?
it's quite a bit more north. Yeah,
Okay.
2.5 hours more north. And if you go just 45 minutes north to Bloomington, that's not that much north, and it's not even directly north. It's a completely different weather. So when I would be in Champaign, the snow is melting. I would drive to Bloomington and it's still in the trees, frozen. Yeah, so I think this group, you know, this also, or the group study specifically today, it also highlights that this practice is just one thing. Like everything else will occur as a derivative of the practice. That's why it's not trying to control, it's not trying to manipulate. It's, you know, we don't have to. We just need to stop resisting the present moment. That's my thesis. The more that we engage the present moment, the more that we can pay attention to it. That's cognitive attention training. We'll be aware of our own minds, our own bodies, our own actions, and drinking 15 sodas a day started to not feel good. I'm paying attention to how I feel. And my choices will go back to Freudian psychology. I can use that. I can use this basic human dynamic to my advantage. I will basically push things away and not necessarily, what's the way that they would use the term? You would seek what feels good and avoid what doesn't. Well, if you're really paying attention, imbalance does not feel good. And when the paying attention accumulates, now you have something to compare it with. Presence and peace compared with, and then yeah, it's a done deal after that. I would imagine you guys will practice this practice to some extent for the rest of your lives, even if we stop this class tomorrow. I mean, you've done it, so you know it works when you do it. The extent that you do it is really just it's up to you. Expression 426, the premise of the practice is the rule of three. The premise of this practice is the rule of three. The rule of three is just a mechanism of redirection. The key component of that mechanism is talking to yourself in a productive fashion that I have now started to call the voice of power, which is a critical component of the rule of three. But I don't know what you mean by the premise of the practice is the rule of three. It's an absolutely essential component of it. Otherwise, you're not really doing it.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. I don't typically re-listen to classes because I'm in them. Like I said, I just happened to come across it and I thought, oh, I'm not gonna walk away from it. God, I thought that's what you said, but
Maybe
yeah,
I did.
maybe I'll listen to it
know.
again.
I don't know.
I just
Maybe I
thought it was
said premise.
interesting.
Maybe premise was not the best word. What does premise mean? Does it mean it is a critical component? Like you can't take the rule of three out and embody. I don't know how you're going to do it. You'd be doing something else, not this practice.
Yeah.
So it's intrinsic. I think the premise means it's like it's what it's based on. The practice isn't based on the rule of three. I would say the practice is based on the third pillar. The rule of three is how to maintain the third pillar when you're experiencing pulls towards habit. Everything is about maintaining the third pillar, including the rule of three, including the mantra, including tricks of attention. And maybe I did use the word premise, but I clarified. I think premise may not be the best word. Not for the rule of three. If premise, I don't know, is premise like the, I don't know. I guess I don't really know what the word premise means.
Premise is like the reason.
No, it's not the reason. The third pillar is the reason. No, the third pillar is the reason.
Is the
Because
foundation you're looking for?
it's a part of the foundation. The rule
Yeah.
of three is a part of the foundation. But so if we're using the word presence as reason, that's the third pillar. Because the reason we're in the psychosis is not paying attention to the present moment. So the only cure for that is paying attention to the present moment on purpose. So the third pillar is the premise of this practice, to engage the present moment on purpose. That is it. So if I said the word premise in relation to anything else, I would like to clarify, because I now understand what premise means more clearly to you. So if premise means, what did we say it means? Premise means the reason? No, the reason for the practice is to maintain the third pillar. The rule of three is to go back to the third pillar and redirect towards the third pillar when you're experiencing your battlegrounds, which there's a lot of them in the beginning. So if I did say that, you can go back and listen, that's fine. I would clarify now and say that the premise of this practice is the third pillar, but you're not doing this practice without the rule of three, because you're not going back to the third pillar, you're just being passive with your thought. If you're being passive with your thought, that you're not engaging the third pillar. So this, if you want to embody, you have to have the rule of three in this practice. You're not doing this practice, you're doing something else. And I hope it works for you, but I don't know what else to say. This practice requires the rule of three. Is that helpful, Jerry? Does that help clarify? I think I'm being pretty clear right now.
Yeah, no, I just,
Okay.
in listening to it, I'm kind of curious to go back and listen now. It was
Sure.
just, you said it like 2 or 3 times. You were really kind of adamant about it. And I just thought, well, that's interesting how he's saying that. I'll just.
Then I may have been, I didn't know that the word premise meant reason for. The rule of three isn't the reason for the practice. That doesn't make any sense. You see what I mean? So if I did say that, it was because I didn't understand how we were using the word premise.
Yeah, and maybe I'm not being clear either. But I just took it in that moment as I was listening that you were trying to express
How
the
important it is.
rule of three. Yes, it's
Yes.
what keeps the practice moving. It's what keeps the practice fluid. And
You can't embody this without it. Or maybe you can. It's going to take 60 years. I have to redirect thought that doesn't serve me. That's the cognitive redirection therapy. That's a part of this practice in terms of embodiment. You don't have to do the rule of three, Jerry, in just basic alignment. Basic alignment is just fox walking, basic stuff. But the moment you go into counterbalance, that's embodying. Does that make sense, Jerry?
yes.
And if you want to embody presence, mindfulness, and deliberate attention, the third pillar, the rule of three is essential. In this practice, at least, in T it is. I don't know if somebody else has something different. Does that help clarify? And yeah, by all means, go back and listen, let me know. But if premise means reason, no, the reason comes from the thesis. My primary thesis is the cause of all human psychosis. You write this down, Jerry. The cause of all human psychological suffering and most of the physical suffering is because we are not paying attention to the present moment on purpose. That's it. Specifically, we're not paying attention to the present moment in favor of thinking. That is my fundamental thesis. That's my PhD thesis.
Premise. I just looked it up. It's referring, if the premise is true, then the conclusion must be true. It's a previous statement or proposition from another is
Well,
inferred.
let's not use that word then. That sounds a bit.
Well, yeah, but it still kind of sounded to me like you were saying. That's how I took it. That the rule of three is essential. It's essential
If you
to
want to
keeping the
embody,
practice.
if you want to
Yeah.
embody the practice, I don't know any other way to do it. Does that make sense? Maybe an ayahuasca excursion or something is the way to do it. That's not how I did it. So that's not what T is about.
I think that's okay to say it's a conclusion. I think it is a conclusion. We've all realized it. Rule of three is essential to this.
To embodying the practice, yeah.
Yeah.
If you choose to embody. I just don't want to put everybody in a box, Even a little bit of mindfulness can help though, and that's why I created basic alignment, which does not include the rule of three, but does include the third pillar. You see what I mean? So the third pillar is essential. It's the most essential. It is the premise. It's where everything comes from. Everything. Being able to pay attention to the present moment. Asset. Active, selective, sensory engagement theory. That's my thesis. That's my PhD. I'm proving it. Not because I have to, but because I can. Why not? Got to do something. I might as well do something I'm good at. Okay. Any other questions? Is there anything else that you guys had on your mind? Otherwise, I think that's a pretty good stopping point. I'll give the puppies a walk. Even take poop bags just in case. All right, well, I'll post this recording so you guys can rewatch it if you feel like it. But otherwise, I'll see you next Monday if you feel inspired to attend. All right. Oh, I can still do one-on-ones. So as soon as I'm done here, I'll go update my schedule, and then you guys can schedule one-on-ones. Probably going to leave later in the week because I still don't know my schedule. I'll know that by the end of this week, but I'm probably not going to work Mondays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So I'll open that up to one-on-ones. I mean, that's a lot of time. And then once I get my exact schedule, I'll open up one-on-ones throughout the whole week. And I'm going to keep doing one-on-ones. I think mindfulness mentoring, just 3 things, or this whole T practice, I'll offer that as well. Presence, mindfulness, deliberate attention. That's the only things right now that I feel qualified to teach and how to embody that. And that's T. And hydrostacy, if you want to know exactly what I'm doing, I'm prepared to offer that. All right. Well, I will see you guys on Monday if you can make it. Questions, comments, concerns, anything at all. You can message me if you want to boost in practice, more reminders, setting up a specific daily practice. Hey, that's available. All right. I will see you guys again soon. Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye,
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
Rachel.
everyone.
Bye,
Have
guys.
a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you.